For a conversation about the view from the C-suite, please welcome David Ricks, the CEO and chairman of Eli Lilly. Here to lead the conversation, please welcome the Atlantic's Washington editor-at-large, Steve Clemons.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hi, Dave.
Hi.
I know you heard a little bit of Andre Iancu's presentation here on, head of the Patent and Trademark Office. Just interested, does your industry look at him as a friend or foe?
Well, I think in general, Patent Office is a friend, right? So our whole industry is based on the premise that we invest at risk with the promise of a patent reward that would be consistent, and in return, society gets disclosure, right? So
that's at the macro level, but when it comes to the research process, the policies, we were just talking about Wall Street being able to kind of file its own patents. I mean, that sounds a little Wild West to me. So if you were to give him advice on tightening up his game, what would it be?
Well, I think the two things, and one of them was mentioned in the prior conversation, that we would say could be improved, because again, what we want is consistency. So a period where you, without interference, can get the reward from the patent, because it takes so much time and money to get there. Right. One is the IPR process, the inter partes review, which is not an invention of this administration, but was created in the Patent Act about 10 years ago, which allows for a second bite of the apple for generic or any entity to challenge your patent. We already have Hatch-Waxman in our sector, and so we find ourselves in awkward positions where, like, we had a product where we defended the Hatch-Waxman proceedings all the way through the appeal court, yet we were still faced with an IPR. So you have what is meant to be a quick and dirty summary review early in the product life or pre-launch. Now we're facing it on a $1 billion post-launch product after Hatch-Waxman's already exhausted. We don't think that should be the case. The federal court should have the predominant point of view on that. That's an example. The other one he mentioned is this issue of patenting biology. So, and I think that's a policy issue that's quite important. We think Supreme Court mostly got it right, that you shouldn't be able to patent a phenomena that nature invented. Right. Rather, you should have something useful that augments it, a product. And those issues have gotten in the way because they restrict freedom to operate and probably stifle innovation.
Maybe you could give us just a short picture, a slice of your dashboard as you look at it. I know today is an important day, that there have been all these filings around the president's blueprint, on getting to cheaper drugs. I know that just a couple of weeks ago, you expanded your own R&D facility in Indianapolis, a $75 million, 130,000 square foot expansion. I've been studying up on you.
Very good.
So it tells me one thing. It tells me that you're investing in your future and you're investing further in expanding R&D. So there must be comfort in this environment. But I also suspect that there are pressures, and that what pharma and others have filed in this response to the administration, I guess, is that drug pricing problems are really not you guys, but really the PBMs. So is that right, or where do you differ?
Well, just to step back, I mean, we're investing in the future because we are in the age of biopharmaceutical innovation. This is the century where we're going to conquer serious disease in a major way. We see advances in cancer and infectious disease. We're working hard on Alzheimer's, which is a scourge of all of us.
You've got a great line on Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Well, we've spent a lot of time working.
It's not a great line. It's a depressing line. I mean, you tweet, or you were out there commenting. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important. You said by 2050, what we spend on Alzheimer's will be greater than the Pentagon's budget.
That's correct. And 1 out of 3 people over the age of 80 already have Alzheimer's. So it's going to be something we all need. If we want cures and solutions to those types of tough diseases, we need to invest in biopharmaceuticals. The good news is, I think the science has never been better in the history of our industry. So that's why we're putting money to work to try to harness that. Of course, the big issue on the other side is how to pay for this. Right. And when products are successfully getting to market, whether there's value for those products. Most of our perspective is based on the following, that we've paid about 15%, 15 cents on the dollar for drugs as a percent of our healthcare spending for the last 50 years as a country. It was the same in 1967 when we adopted Medicare as it is today. Actually, that number really hasn't changed. But what has happened, and why consumers are rightly, I think, very upset about drug prices, is their out-of-pocket costs are rising much more dramatically than the cost to the system. We're shifting costs from federal and private programs to consumers. The blueprint, I think, despite what the headlines say, gets to that issue. They're working on ways to reduce what's called the gross to net spread, or list to actual prices, to flatten that down so that consumers get more benefit. We're for that. We submitted our ideas, over several dozen last night, to HHS, and that's what it says.
Why is transparency on that so hard to get to? You know, Heather Bresch is going to be here later. I'm going to ask her about EpiPen and some of that, but I know that part of what she brought to the game is saying there's an ecosystem out there, and there are a lot of culprits in the pricing story.
Sure.
What do you think? I often ask people in different positions that change places, you know, if you were to head Mylan, or you were to head a generics, or you were to head another part of the industry, what do you think is missing in achieving greater transparency on the access part of this forum, on the pricing side, that we're not seeing?
Yeah, well, you know, it's a tough issue because healthcare is super complicated. Of course, if we step back from drugs and ask the question, well, do we have pricing transparency in healthcare? The answer is absolutely no. If you go to get a procedure, or a colonoscopy, or a knee operation, tell me if you can know the price in advance, because it's really difficult. And that's also true for pharmaceuticals. The difference is we actually publish list prices, and none of those other services do. So I think our macro point is we need much broader transparency in healthcare. I think these problems are all solvable. Let me just put it that way. That what we really want, I think what patients want, are new cures for serious disease. We can make them more affordable from an out-of-pocket cost perspective, but we have to rebalance the system, which has become stacked against pharmaceutical innovation, more out-of-pocket costs for that than a hospital stay, 4 times as much on average patients pay for drugs versus other services in the healthcare system. Why are we doing that when medicines are probably the most efficient and effective way to treat any disease? Generic products, you mentioned generics, are widely used in the US. It's the highest penetration of generics globally. 90% of drugs prescribed today will be generics, and they're relatively cheap and very effective. And that's a byproduct of the patent system we have, which forces disclosure, which is the deal we make, and after some period of time, 10 or 12 years, generics can freely launch and create cheap innovation. That's a system that works. What we need to do is rebalance this pricing and value.
Do you think the generics industry is unreasonable in its demands of what it wants, that it's shirking or walking away from some parts of that deal?
In general, no. I think it's a different industry. They serve a different purpose. Where we have our spats with them is this issue of certainty. So our nirvana, I don't have a generics business. A lot of my peer companies do. Our nirvana would be to know exactly how much time we have to get that return. It's why we like data package exclusivity, which is a belt and suspenders regulatory approach to say biologics 12 years. And then at the end, we can plan for that. We can disinvest, generics can come in, prices can drop. And our job, I think what we're paid to do by society, is then go put those returns back into a cure for Alzheimer's.
You know, your comments about Alzheimer's really did strike me, that I read that you made, about just the size and scope and the scale of that cost being larger than Pentagon spending in the future. Is that a future that can be avoidable through R&D? Is that something, when you look at it, that is just where we're going to be with costs no matter what? Or do you think that technology and investment and the innovation side of this question gives us an opportunity for different weighting, I suppose, of that cost?
Well, putting the science problems aside, which are real, and we have yet to conquer this, we can use analogies from other problems. Look at heart disease. #1 killer in the US, still is. But the rate of myocardial infarctions has dropped 40% in the last 2 decades. Why? Well, it's largely because of patentable inventions, primarily pharmaceuticals, to some degree devices like stents. We can change the course of chronic disease, and in doing so, change the course of the spending. Today, just to put this in perspective, we spend about $300 billion with a B on Alzheimer's and dementia treatment. Most of that is services, nursing home costs, which is out of state Medicaid budgets primarily. That is about the size of the entirety of all on-patent drugs in the United States. So you take the entire spend of the United States on drugs, it's equal to 1 disease treatment. Can we affect that? Sure. And I think bring those costs down. That's what our industry is here to do.
You have a global footprint. You're everywhere around the world. It's one of the nice things to talk to someone who sees beyond the U.S. borders. Who's getting it better than we are?
Well, historically, nobody. I think this has been there's a reason why Most R&D in our industry, 70%, is in the US. Most venture-backed funding for new ideas is in the US because the patent system has been consistent and reliable. New ideas like IPR threaten that. I think that's not a good development. We'd like to see that change. If you look at Europe, pretty good. I think their courts have been less consistent because they don't have a unified court system. They have country by country, so you can get sort of picked off in Portugal or whatever on a particular patent, which is EU-wide, but you have to defend it locally. We'd like to see that change. Asia, of course, has been the place where everyone has complained historically. Since WTO, China has, I think, improved their patent system. And in our sector more recently, and it's strange I'm saying this because when I used to run our Chinese business and we complained loudly about the IP system, they just introduced draft regulations that would move to 12 years of data package exclusivity like the US on biologics, that would allow for linkage, which is a key concept where you can block generics until the court has heard out the patent. That's a key thing for us. So they've really basically cookie cuttered the US system and are proposing to move to that. That's a great development. And I think a credit to all the people who've worked in civil service on both parties through the years in terms of working on the Chinese IP problem.
Take us just into your decision-making suite for a second. You know, I know that you sort of sit at are you more of a money guy or a science guy?
I'm a business guy, but I love science.
You love science,
yeah.
Okay. So you're not immune to the science. So they're bringing you proposals inside the company, top secret, we don't know. So tell us what the coolest things are that we don't know of that are coming down the pike.
Right. Well, if I disclose that, our investors would get mad, and I think it might jeopardize patents.
Or they might be happy.
But let me talk at the industry level. I think, again, we're in the biopharmaceutical century. We're seeing, starting with the human genome being mapped, I think a tremendous growth. There's a reason we see all these new medicines. They're doing amazing things, virtually curing hepatitis C. We're studying breast cancer, and it's now difficult to run a study long enough to check the difference in survival. I think that's a giant victory for patients with breast cancer. People are living years and years with what formerly was a reasonably acute and fatal disease. What's next? So I think it's been discussed. CRISPR and gene therapy is a very exciting development for our disease. We have one approved gene therapy from Spark Therapeutics for blindness. Right. It'll start with orphan disease like that, but that's a vector that could go a very long way. Like gene
you're
therapy,
partnered in some of these?
Well, we're of course evaluating and looking at and developing these technologies. Is interfering with RNA or promoting RNA using the byproduct of DNA to change proteins and to change disease. That's an extremely promising area. And then finally, cell therapy, and we do have a few approved cell therapies like CAR T, which is being used to treat certain kinds of lymphoma. That probably has quite a bit of opportunity to it as well. Heretofore, we've basically made medicines three ways: organic chemicals, monoclonal antibodies, or therapeutic peptides. Those will continue to be very important modalities, but I think we're now seeing an explosion in new modalities that I think is incredibly exciting for disease.
Just two quick questions, then we're going to go to all of you. Are the hepatitis C costs are going to come down? I mean, that's a perfect example of an innovative.
They already have. They already have, and this is a great.
What is the price now?
So I think Gilead launched at $86,000. We don't make these products, but what I understand is right now net pricing to insurance companies and government is below $30,000 a year per course of therapy, and this is a therapy that cures 90% of the people. So it's probably a pretty good trade-off.
And finally, we're all trying to figure out how President Trump thinks about things. If you were to share with him two things to make your case about your industry that President Trump doesn't understand, what would they be?
Well, we're in an IP forum. We need a strong and consistent intellectual property
And you
system.
don't think he gets that?
I'm not sure,
Okay.
right? I think actually he's not someone who comes from proximity to our industry. I think this is an education's been something we've been working on with the administration. Secondly, that medicines are the best value in going in healthcare. And what we need to do is have a fairer system for pricing for patients. That's the problem. It's the patient cost, not the total cost.
Well, thank you. Let me go to you guys. Questions? Yes, right here. Hi.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savasco from IBM Watson Health.
Hi, Kevin.
So with all the new push for precision medicine, where you can tailor treatment to a particular patient's genome and background, how is that affecting the life cycle of your drugs in both in the patents and then after the market, where maybe the doctors can get the right drug the first time to the patient versus maybe having a couple of trial and errors along the way?
Terrific question.
Yeah, well, this has been, I think, a big unlock, particularly in serious diseases like cancer, where we can now decide not just what drug for what patient, but what drug not for that patient. I think that's important. And that's one version of tailoring, we call it, because the idea of precision is sort of a vision. To think that there's one medicine for you and a different one for me, we're not quite there. But what we can do is use analytical tools to screen out medicines that are unlikely to work probabilistically.
Are you a fan of value-based pricing on those? So for those
we're a fan of value-based pricing for everything.
Huh.
Again, because we want to compete our inventions against the rest of the healthcare system.
Right.
The current pricing system is built on a cost per unit. So tell me the price today, I'll buy it, I'll get the value or not.
So you could marry value to precision-based. You've got a model.
Yeah, and we already do this. We have dozens of value-based agreements, some in precision medicine, some in general medicine, diabetes, where we go at risk on lowering A1C costs.
Christina? Yes.
Hi, yes. My name is Luke Weesey, actually born and raised in Indianapolis, so very familiar with the work you guys do, and now with JDRF. But if there's ever been a time to be a patient, it's now. With innovation and technology, this is the time to be a patient as a diabetic myself. But do you think we as a society and as a government with agencies and whatnot are ready for the future and set up for success in the future for the innovation and technology that's headed our way?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for the work JDRF does. We're great partners with them. The short answer is no. I think that's part of the compression and angst that is embedded in the pharmaceutical industry. Is when new innovation comes, we're rarely ready, and that the innovation hits the shores. Practice of medicine, I've read, takes about 17 years on average to change practice of medicine. Diagnostics are often not reimbursed to the precision medicine question. Take Alzheimer's, where we make a diagnostic which detects amyloid in your brain. It's unreimbursed by CMS.
Right.
Those factors take time to get worked into the system, and accelerating that from a patient advocacy perspective is one of the key things we could partner on, so that more patients could benefit sooner from breakthroughs.
Yes.
My name is Jonathan Kimball. I'm with Burson Marsteller. You mentioned China's advances in data protection, and it's related, I think, a lot to their commitments to the WTO. This administration is challenging some of the issues related to free trade and even the sort of the foundation of the WTO and some of its requirements. Can you address this from the innovative pharmaceutical industry? What is the perspective on this?
Well, we're free traders. I think on the one hand, we're for putting pressure on bad actors and systems that are not equal and reciprocal, to use the president's words, in trade. We're for that principle. That maybe the question more is about the means, whether we should use multilateral organizations like WTO or bilateral negotiations to improve that. At the end of the day, what matters most is whether the results change on the ground in places like China. What I'm saying in biopharmaceutical sector, perhaps to some surprise, even by CEOs in our industry, is China's changing rapidly for the better. Japan is improving. Europe is good. If we can get those four places to rise to the American standard, which we're not quite there yet, but the trend line is there, I think that's a big advance for innovation and therefore for patients in those markets.
You guys are all like family to me now, since you're all up here early in the morning and you can spend the day with us. I'm interviewing the Deputy Director General of the WTO today at the Atlantic offices at 4:45, Alan Wolf. So if any of you want to attend, since I trust that you're responsible, cool members of an audience, just ask my staff and they'll tell you where to go. So that's it. Let me just wrap up real quick. Scott Gottlieb, FDA Commissioner, I interviewed him on this stage just a few weeks ago, and he had talked about your industry and that your industry needed to end the shenanigans. It was called the End the Shenanigans speech. Yep. What do you think he meant, and are you ending the shenanigans?
Yes. Well, Scott is Dr. Gottlieb knows our industry very well. He's an expert. So let me just put it on the table. There, of course, in any system are people who could abuse it. And in some cases, there are actions by our sector that certainly my company would not undertake and could be categorized that way. I think that's what he's talking about. In particular, in his bee in his bonnet is the REMS related system, where companies apparently, I don't know all the details, have restricted access to samples so generics can do their work. We've never done that. We're not for that. Actually, we support the CREATES Act, which is being worked on the Hill now. There's other types of abuses like that, which we are, as a company, don't support, because we want fairness and consistency. And if we undermine that with actions on the back end, which act to prolong the the life of the patent artificially, that's not good for the long term. And I think I'm proud to lead a company that for 40 years has taken that position, and I don't think we have practices that fall into that category.
Thank you so much. David Ricks, Chairman and CEO of Eli Lilly. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.